major business directional change. They talk about a transformation from a regulatory perspective. They talk about a transformation from a change in the customer marketplace. There's a lot of different things that yield transformational events. And yes, we mean all of those things, but I actually propose that there's more to that term transformational than simply big change in your enterprise. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. Leadership. It's funny how often the word is used and how many contexts the word is used in. My son is a brand new college freshman, and his first class, his first elective that he's taking is a leadership class. They teach leadership at university level for a reason, because people need to lead. It's part of what it makes for a successful business. Now, sadly, a lot of people think leadership equates to management. And I bet most of you in the room don't really think that, but I want to cover off on that for a few minutes. Leadership is more than management. It's more than executing the plan. Leadership is about inspiration. It's about setting direction. It's not about being the boss and telling other people what to do. In fact, a lot of the best leaders in the world aren't the bosses. They influence, they guide, they persuade, they inspire within their organization. So when we talk about transformational leadership, we are including not just you in the seats who are the bosses, who are the executives of your organization, but also everyone in your organization who has an opportunity to persuade and lead and inspire the organization. So at least that's certainly the way I think about the concept, and hopefully that resonates with most of you as well. Agile, that's not a software development technique. Agile means agility in the context of this particular event. It's about change, and you're going to hear that theme presented continuously throughout this event. Responding to change and being able to be the organization that you need to be in the context of an ever-changing environment is what agility is all about. So we're going to talk a lot about agility as we go through this. And those of you who came here thinking this was an Agile software development event, probably a good time to leave, because we're not really going to talk about any of that stuff today. Corporation. Corporation's pretty straightforward. You know, it implies business. You know, we have a lot of public sector people in here, and we're certainly not excluding you from that process. Corporation is private and public sector organizations that come together for the purposes of achieving a certain mission and a certain objective. And I'll get to that in a moment too. More words. Enterprise. I love this word. I use it all the time. It's almost overused by me and a lot of other people as well. What's the difference between enterprise and corporation? Is there one? Well, it depends on what you mean by those two terms. Corporation is often looked at as the legal entity, as the business entity, and enterprise means the venture, what it is you're trying to do as a business. When I use the term enterprise, I'm actually thinking about not just your business, but all of the relationships that you have within the world around you. And one of the objectives that we have and the mission of our organizations is to be a successful enterprise. And in most companies, that means profitable and creating shareholder value. In most private or public sector organizations, that often means providing citizen services or whatever you need to accomplish your particular mission in the public marketplace. I actually think those two definitions of mission are inadequate. Let me come back to mission in a moment. And I'll explain what I mean by mission in just a few minutes as well. Systems is the next one I wanted to talk about. In this room, half of you are IT people, and systems often mean applications. They mean development activities or acquisitions to load and install a particular business function in the form of a software-enabled solution inside your organization, right? That's what most of us think around systems. I'm using a more global definition of systems. In fact, if we go back one build to enterprise, I actually see the enterprise as a system. And many people here do. It's a very complex system. It's a wonderfully complex system. It's a system that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if we go back to transformational leadership and agile and corporation in the context of enterprise and systems, we're now talking about a problem space that's all about turning a very large ship from going that direction to that direction to that direction and back to that direction in response to, and hopefully proactively in consideration of, changes in the world around us. So systems is something we really think of as large scale, and the enterprise is probably the largest system that any of you are going to have to deal with. Mission. What is that mission? I said stakeholder value and profit, or shareholder value and profit, and citizen stakeholder service delivery are inadequate definitions of mission. I contend that the mission of most organizations is to survive. Not just survive, sustain, and be an ongoing concern. How many of you, just a show of hands, are managing and leading your business to go out of business within the next 6 months? Or the next year? Or the next 2? Sadly, if you look at a lot of the decisions made in your organization, they are made in the moment to deal with solving yesterday's problems today in the response to some kind of particular problem with not particularly any insight into the bigger picture view. In fact, a good friend of mine, we sit down and talk about sort of 3 tiers of thinking and decision making in the organization. We have a lot of time and energy spent on solving yesterday's problems today. You know, the whole break-fix approach to dealing with problems in our enterprise. Good stuff, we need to do it, it's important, but we can't do it from a short-sighted perspective. A little more elevated perspective is working on today's problems today. And we spend a ton of our energy and almost all of our variable budgets dealing with solving today's problems today, chasing new opportunities. I contend that when we start thinking about transformational leadership, agile corporation, enterprise, and systems, we really ought to be thinking about solving tomorrow's problems today, positioning our organizations to be transformational as we move forward, which brings me back to transformation. Transformation, in my mind, is not just a big activity or an event or a very large project. It's a way of life. It's a way of life designed to position your organization to be able to not just respond, but respond actively and proactively to the changing needs of the marketplace so that you're not always trying to catch up with things that you're doing. And here is, you know, sort of the list of familiar problem statements that I hear every day from business people, from IT people. Integration issues. We can't make things fit together. Agility issues, we're not responsive. We can't get there as fast as we need to get. Alignment issues, we have miscommunications between the business and IT organizations, and we're not able to align those 2 ideas together. And transformational issues associated around the idea that we're not achieving our larger enterprise objectives. Why do all these problems exist? A lot of it's history. A lot of it's because we have gotten really good at solving yesterday's problems today, but we've done so without the vision and insight and the bigger picture view that we need to use moving forward. So I'm quickly going to cover off on a bunch of topics in our next half hour together. First, the big picture. What do I mean by that? I'm going to talk about creating a portfolio view or a collection of views. What do those mean, and how do we deal with thinking about that at different levels? It's a little esoteric, it's a little conceptual, and if you'll go with me on it, I think it might resonate with you, at least I hope it will. I'm going to talk a little bit about managing the portfolio mix in your organization as an aid to help you think about segmenting your activities to keep that big picture in mind all the time. And then we're going to talk about some process views, about how these processes all fit together. So let's talk about the big picture perspective. What we have to do from a big picture perspective is to understand not just the systems, not just the applications, not just the technology, not just the information, not just the data, the processes, the functions, the human capital, and all those things. We have to think of all of them together, because an enterprise is the sum total of all the things that we do collectively, and they all impact one another in subtle and interesting ways. And we have to understand what those dependencies are so that we don't create the problems that we talked about on the prior slide. In colloquial terms, I would describe that as the law of unintended consequences. How many times have you been caught by the gotcha, where you've built a system, you've designed it, you've implemented a new business process, and a year later you realize, oops, we never thought of that. How do you insulate yourself against that kind of thinking? There are certain things you can do to help minimize those activities. We need to be thinking of trade-offs in order to solve these problems. I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s in the space race. And this whole notion of systems engineering, are you familiar with that term? Anyone? Systems engineering is the science of dealing with large-scale complex systems. So layman's definition, there's a lot more to it than that. But systems engineering grew up around solving a very large mission of putting a man on the moon and bringing him back to Earth successfully. That was the mission. Everything that led up to it, from 1960 on up to 1969, was part of that large-scale program. It was more than just a big project. It was an integrated effort with thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in lots of companies all working together, thinking about the big picture. And everything that happened along the way was not an accident. It was a specific step designed to fit the pictures all together. We didn't go off and solve one problem at a time in absence of the bigger consideration. A real-world example that I worked with, Michelle mentioned that I was chief architect at United Airlines. I was there during the rollout, or the development and rollout of the Boeing 777. And United was a rollout partner with Boeing at that particular time. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth and talking to those people. One of the things that you obviously figure out along the way when you're building a large, complex system like that, you don't just go and say, we know we need an engine, let's go build the best engine we can, without consideration of the rest of the machine. We know we need a tail assembly, let's go build the best tail assembly we've ever built. You really need to think of it in the context of what the overall mission is. Engine comes later, tail assembly comes later. Recognition that we need an engine, we need a tail assembly, all come early in the conversation. But the choice, the selection, and assembly of those things don't come until a little bit later on. This idea of trade-offs and sequencing and thinking big and understanding where you're going is an absolutely essential part of achieving continuous transformation and large-scale, long-term agility for your organization as a whole. We have to understand that mission. And value, long-term sustaining value, is best delivered when you take that entire enterprise into context. Let's talk about breaking it up into parts. If you start thinking about that big picture view, how do we manage that? How do we decompose the problem into some piece parts that help us as managers and leaders make the activities come together in a coordinated, integrated way? You know, obviously we start breaking things up into smaller subsections. And the first subsections that you need to think about is looking at your major portfolio categories within your organization. Three general groupings we talk about are business activities, assets, and projects. And there's kind of a subtle and really interesting relationship amongst those we'll talk about really shortly. And you need to, once you've figured out what those categories are, you need to think about the purpose and the mission of those particular categories within certain contexts. So we ask organizations to think about all of your assets, all of your projects, all of your strategies and visions in the context of their purpose, and to perhaps even think about segmenting those into different categories. Most of you have a portfolio categorization system at some level in your organization, but my bet is it's not formalized. It's useful to think about formalizing that. And one of the ways that we've kind of hit on that's very common in the industry and the people that are doing this is the idea of separating into a run, grow, and transform metaphor. Run being the things that you need to keep the lights on. It's all of the elements of your business that if you don't have, the business stops. That's the run category of portfolios. You have to invest a certain amount of time, energy, resources, and health improvements into your run portfolio to make sure it sustains. Growth, the grow objective, is really all about organic improvements in your organization, keeping up with sequential improvements. Hopefully you're in successful organizations and you're getting more clients and more customers and building more products and acquiring partners and thinking about this growth, whether it be organic or stepwise growth. Growth is an objective, and we make certain investments to accommodate growth. And finally, transformation. Again, like I said, continuous transformation is an important context, but for the purpose of portfolio views, transformation is another subset view that says we're going to invest a certain amount of money in becoming the company we want to be through pointed efforts designed to yield those improvements. That's the portfolio category. So once you understand run, grow, transform, the next logical step is to say, well, what makes sense for our organization? How much investment should we allocate to run? How much investment to grow? How much investment to transform? By the way, that's not an IT decision, and it's not a business decision. It's a collective decision of the leadership team because it really helps steer the organization in the right direction. Most organizations today have their run investment anywhere from 75 to 95% of their total budgetary view, which is a pretty high number. Doesn't leave a lot of room for grow and transform. But one of the things that we think about from transformation, it's not just achieving those big projects, but it's about achieving a sustainable mix in your portfolio investment strategy. So yet another dimension of transformation is to transform yourself to make sure that you are investing in a way that your company can achieve its particular objectives. So you want to think about managing to your investment levels, and more importantly, transforming your investment levels to achieve your long-term vision. So objective one, how do we manage these portfolios? Manage first within, between, and across all the portfolios. Understand those dependencies. Build a foundational model that allows you to have visibility and insight, line of sight, into all of the parts that affect the other parts of your organization. That's critical to managing these portfolios. You have to be smart about how you manage your portfolio individually, but you also have to manage your portfolio in the context of these portfolio investment categories and the mission that those portfolios are designated to deal with. You want to set the goals for the portfolio and manage those portfolios each on their own life cycle. Again, coordinating those life cycles from an overall perspective. And then you want to think about, and here's where I'm going to start talking about the differences between my top 3 portfolio categories of business activities and assets and projects. The idea is to develop competency across the delivery of all of these categories and segment your focus on those portfolio categories according to their objectives. Business activities is the work that your organization does. It's a growing and evolving approach to understanding your changing environment, your changing marketplace. That's where strategy resides. Strategy is all about establishing the direction for your business. The asset portfolio is everything you have as a company. If we were to fly about 20,000 feet above Calgary right now and look down on your organization, we were going to take an instantaneous snapshot in very, very high resolution, and we were to inventory everything you had, not just your wires and your boxes and your software, but also your facilities and your people and your behaviors and your business relationships and your data and information, your partnerships. Everything collectively is an asset of your company because you built them. You chose them, you installed them in your company, and now you have to manage them. The way you did that is through a history of projects. Project is the unit of change. The project portfolio is how you change assets in your company. If you have a set of assets that you don't like, you launch a series of projects to change those assets to something you do like. So if you think about it that way, it's a very simple and realistic model to understand how change happens. And I'm going to show you a couple of quick processes when we're done here to fit that all together. So how do you do this? You know, I'm going very quickly because there's a lot of nuance and layer to this that we'll talk about, that speakers will talk about throughout the day. But you begin by the people in this room, the executive leaders of your organization, setting the right tone. To include in every decision that you make, in every conversation that you have in the organization, not just the conversation about living in the moment and getting today's project done on budget and on time, which is important, that's part of the conversation, but also where does that project fit, how are you doing that project, how does it affect the assets, and are we achieving our larger term objectives with it? All of those things together are really part of the conversation, and the executive leadership sets that tone. You then set your portfolio mix and your strategy to align with that strategic objective. You focus on each individual portfolio, vertically, horizontally, and then you think about looking at them from all of the different integrative angles, looking at cross-functional perspectives of these particular portfolios. You coordinate those programs and projects collectively. And here, the last couple I think you're going to hear about a lot today. Communicate a lot. Every speaker that's going to talk about people and communications and driving transformational change in their organizations is going to focus on what does it mean to lead people to get them to change, to achieve these objectives. So integrating the communication to involve all of the stakeholders in the conversation and get their ideas and perspectives is really an important part of this. I'm not going to focus too much on integrated governance, but having you as leaders, since you're setting the tone, you must be the ones to coordinate the governance mechanisms. You must be the ones to stand up there and stand behind a direction and stick with the direction in your organization. Integrated governance across all the portfolios makes sense. I see far too many islands of governance when I go and visit clients. There's a service-oriented architecture governance. There's a cloud governance. There's a project portfolio management governance. There's an enterprise architecture governance. There's a this governance and a that governance. There's an agile development governance. There's a ITIL governance. I'm sorry, too many governances. There's really only one governance. Those of you who are C-level executives in the room, make no mistake, one governance. You own it, you run it, everything else has to connect to that. And that's a hard thing to do. It requires a lot of attention and a lot of detail and a lot of motivation, but it's really, really important because there's a lot of moving parts. I use the term wonderfully complex system as the enterprise, and I meant that. It's inspiring to see it all work together. It's inspiring to have your finger in a place or your fingers involved with the decisions, and it's inspiring to make those decisions and stand behind them as a leader of the organization. It's really important for the leadership team to be on the same page around governance. I promised I wouldn't talk too much about it. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox. Most importantly, look inward to yourself. If these ideas and concepts aren't in play in your organization, ask yourself why. If they're in play in your organization and they're not working, we need to figure out how. So do an honest and diagnostic and self-assessment about what you're all about. The transformational view that I talk about when we talk about the relationship really is the undercurrent of this event, or the under theme of this event, which is the relationship between the business organization and the IT organization. There's two critical parts to this equation. Part one is you're one enterprise. Whether you're in IT or not, you're on the same team, you're partners, you're strategically working together to achieve the mission that the organization is trying to achieve. Your mission is transformation, to become the company, the organization, the government entity that you want to be going into the future, to prepare yourself for ongoing and continuous transformational change. Both the business and IT are partners in that conversation. The enterprise is the whole outer rectangle here. There is the business domain and there's the IT domain. Business people should not be involved at the detail level at IT, and the IT people should not be involved in the detail level of the business, but there's a common and frequent interchange between them. IT people own the they own the physical, they own the implementations, they own the details, they own the applications and the data and the technology and the infrastructure. I'm sorry, I used a bad word. I used the own word, and I really didn't mean to do that, because the enterprise owns everything. The IT organization is the steward of it. As the steward of it, you keep that domain whole, but only in response to what goes on at the business. The business people, the business domain, is around business operations and information and how those concepts fit together within your enterprise. And that line that connects them together is a very frequent and common interchange. If that line is broken, we see the IT organization thinking of the business as their customers. They become an order taker. Everything happens reactively, and the business just tends to push things onto the IT organization. The IT organization tends to react. There's no partnership there. We need to make that connection a lot tighter. And I know a number of people today in their presentations are going to talk about that. A couple of last process slides. Organic, wonderful, complex system is the enterprise. All of these portfolio views are the center of this circle. These three circles are processes that are continuously spinning in your organization. The strategy process is always a forward-looking, what do we want to be when we grow up kind of a model. It's looking at the business vision, the strategy of the organization, what's going on in the world around us, and developing, in partnership with all of the stakeholders in the organization, the business strategic alignment mission. What are we going to do and how are we going to steer the organization going forward? A discipline that I'm very fond of called enterprise architecture isn't really about technology. You know, most people hear the words enterprise architecture and they think it's about architecture. It has nothing to do with architecture. Architectures are the byproduct of that activity. The operative word in enterprise architecture is enterprise. It's back to this transitional mission that we talked about achieving the objective of the organization. Enterprise architecture is about doing design for the entire enterprise. It must come before doing design for individual pieces of the enterprise. If you do that, you now have a context to measure everything against. You have the ability to achieve the alignment that you need and become the company you want to be. I'll show you more in the next chart. Once you have this enterprise architecture in place, you can establish a future state snapshot of that asset portfolio. You can understand where you are right now, and you can rationalize your way through what sequence of activities do we need to do to transform to the new model that we want to be. And that's where that overlap of transformation comes from. Transformation is the next step. Transformation is the portfolio of possible activities we could do, every project, every initiative, every program that will help us achieve our objective to be the company we want to be. We use that then to feed into a project portfolio management process to say, okay, how should we sequence it? How much money do we have? What are the resources available? And then we'll only be able to do a portion of them, but we want to do the smart ones. We want to think about the big rocks. We want to think about getting them right. We don't want to get stuck in dealing with a lot of the little rocks and pebbles and stones. We want to start driving our organization in the right direction. That investment overlap with strategy is where we connect these parts together. That enterprise architecture circle I talked about is focused on the assets of the organization. It's the unique discipline that can have the global view of all of the things in play in your organization and how they fit together. We're not necessarily concerned about the individual details. We care more about how do they fit together in a framework of connected, interrelated, dependent parts that collectively will serve our future need. This is a very complicated picture that I could spend an hour on all by itself, and I don't have the time. But suffice it to say, if you are interested in this picture or these concepts, come and talk to me on a break, because I will be happy to share a little bit more detail with you on it. But the short version of it is, once we understand the business vision and strategy, we can establish a target. And that target is out there at some point in time in the future. And that value that that future model of your enterprise delivers should be higher than where you are right now, however you measure value. Our mission is a journey to get from where we are now to where we need to get. It's communicated through a series of roadmaps and life cycles. And every project that we do, that circle, square, and triangle along the bottom of the graph, are meant to represent individual projects. Every individual project has one purpose in life, and it's not to achieve the project. The purpose in life of the project is to vector the organization to be where you want it to be. It exists for the sole purpose of becoming the company you want to be. It's a part of it. So you want to make sure you know where you're headed when you do the project. And then, once you got that under control, you can go back and do larger scale transformation and start really picking up big chunks of where you are right now and moving it forward. There's three missions that we see around this. One is strategic direction setting. It's up there in the front. That's the first and primary role of the leadership team, is to make sure we know where we're headed. And then to guide the projects through the architectures and directions we communicate to achieve it through the individual projects we do, and then to go back and look at big chunks of the enterprise and transform those portfolios moving forward. Last two slides and I'll get off the stage. 6 things for an effective enterprise architecture program. Make sure you understand the business strategy and link to it. Make sure you understand what's possible from a project portfolio perspective. Integrate with the existing decision-making processes, governance, budgeting, etc. Collaborate and communicate with a large community of subject matter experts, because the enterprise architects and the leaders are not the subject matter experts in everything. They need to be involved. You need to go back to your shops and pull all the smart people into the room and start having these conversations. Create an audience-specific deliverable from a common knowledge base. You need to understand how all of these things fit together. So every time somebody brings something new, your first question should be, where does that fit in what we're trying to achieve as an organization? That's the first question. It isn't what is it trying to achieve or why are you doing it? It's where does it fit? Which, by the way, will actually help probably remove it from discussion. If it doesn't fit, why are you doing it? So that's the context. Balance between this approach. Good ideas happen in the organization in unexpected ways. So step one is to make sure that those good ideas get an audience and can be measured against this architectural approach. Doing enterprise architecture better, long conversation. I'm going to skip it in the interest of time, but the leadership team has to be involved with managing, creating, guiding and coaching the organization, governing the process, and establishing a leadership role through influence in your enterprise. Again, more conversations about this yesterday. I don't have time for questions, but I will take all questions anytime during the day. And if any of you wanted to reach out for me after the fact, you can certainly contact Michelle. I have cards around. I can give them to you as well, and we can talk about this in more detail. It's really a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of interchange and a lot of interaction that you can all go through.